Certainly overwhelming for me to see so many people here. Why did you come when you could have heard Jesse Ventura at the same time? I don't know. But the title of these lectures that I've given is announced is Things a Computer Scientist Rarely Talks About, and the subtitle is Interactions Between Faith and Computer Science. I'm here because computer science is wonderful, but it isn't everything. So today I want to go beyond technical stuff to consider other things that I value. In this series, I'm going to be giving 6 talks that are more or less independent of each other. Anna asked me to give between 5 and 10 lectures, and I decided on 6 because I could think of 6 jokes that I could yeah, and that was the first. Okay. Well, I have to tell jokes once in a while to see if you can really hear me. I don't know. The first reaction that I had when I was invited to give these talks was to say, no way, this is impossible. The whole subject is obviously way too deep for me. I've given lots of talks at universities during the past 40 years, but they were always to present solutions to problems, to proofs of math theorems, precise analysis of computational tasks, general theories to organize bodies of knowledge and things like that, things that I suppose I'm reasonably good at. But surely I can't come before you today and pretend to be an expert on faith or God, much less to claim that I have any solutions to problems that have challenged and baffled the best minds of human minds for thousands of years. So it's especially terrifying to me to see so many of you here because I hate to disappoint you. I have a PhD, which makes me a doctor of philosophy, but it doesn't make me a philosopher. The PhD was in math. I can do math and computer science okay, but my formal training in religious studies is basically nil since high school. I've done a lot of reading in my spare time, but why should I expect you to listen to me talking about one of my hobbies? When I read what other people have written about matters of faith, it's quite clear to me that my own ideas don't measure up to those of world-class philosophers and theologians. I'm not too bad at reacting to other people's notions of religion, but I'm not too good at introducing anything that is fundamentally new or important in this area. In other words, as far as theology goes, I'm a user, not a developer. Now, a week and a half ago, I went to Memorial Chapel at Harvard and was in the audience when Billy Graham came. And I'm happy to say that he had not only a standing room only crowd, but he filled the aisles and the doorways. Hello. And well, he deserves it. But I'm. Yeah. This is great. We used to have a printer that would talk to us at random moments. Okay. So I'm surprised to see so many of you here when you could have seen Jesse Ventura. Yeah. Okay. Well, so turning things around, what if an eminent theologian were to give a series of lectures about computer programming? Would I go out of my way to go to hear them? Would I find them of value afterwards? Not sure. On the other hand, all computer people present here today know that discussions of CS are not totally different from discussions of religion. Especially when we consider languages for computer programming. In the 60s, people would often talk about Algol theologians. These were people who were skilled in the exegesis of obscure texts passed down by international committees. Over the years, we had many different. We could use all the analogies of religious studies when we were discussing computer languages. And over the years, numerous high priests of programming have expounded one language or one methodology over another with religious zeal, and they often have very fanatical disciples. Everyone knows the world of computer science is full of cults. So I guess religion and CS are not totally separate. They share a fair amount of common ground. Of course, we're all familiar with C.P. Snow's famous metaphor of the two cultures which separate us into two camps. Last month, I was in England. I visited the new British Library in London, a magnificent building that's built to last at least 200 years. It just opened, I think, in February. And I learned that it actually enshrines the notion of two cultures permanently in stone. The new British Library has two separate sections and two separate reading rooms, one for the humanities and one for the sciences. It turns out that there are good reasons for this from the librarian standpoint. The humanists tend to work with a small number of books from the historic collections, while the scientists tend to work with lots of books from current periodicals. So the architect gave the humanists a big room with lots of desks in the middle, surrounded by reference works on the four walls, while the scientists got a room with lots of journals in the middle, surrounded by desks on four sides. You see, he gives the one-dimensional thing to the desks for the scientists and the two-dimensional thing to the journals, but he switches the dimensions for the humanists. Now, actually, this week Stanford is dedicating its new library, and henceforth in Stanford's library we're not going to have two cultures but three: humanities, sciences, and social sciences. And everybody knows, of course, that engineering is yet another culture. The truth is, in fact, that C.P. Snow got it all wrong by at least an order of magnitude. There are many more than two cultures. I think a lot of you know the Macintosh ads telling us to think different. From my own corner of the academic world, I know, for example, that physicists think different from mathematicians. Mathematicians who do algebra think different from mathematicians who do geometry. Both kinds of mathematicians think different from computer scientists who work on algorithms, and so on and so on. People often decry this lack of unity in the knowledge of the world, but let's face it, people are different, and vive la différence. Now, even if people did think alike, and they don't, we would have to, in universities, to cope with the vast growth of knowledge. In my own field, for example, it was once possible for a grad student of the 60s to learn just about everything there was to know about computer science. Nowadays, the subject is so enormous, nobody can hope to cover more than a tiny portion of it. I receive, on the average, at least one copy of a journal every day. It's more like 8 or 9 per week. These are just the ones I subscribe to, not the ones that I find in the library. They're filled with good stuff, and it represents only a small fraction of my corner of the field. Growth is relentless. So a constant trend towards more and more specialization is inevitable. We have to concentrate on a small part of the world's knowledge if we have any hope of continuing to advancing it. There might be some light on the horizon, however. I predict that in the not-too-distant future, people in academic life are going to define themselves not by one specialty area, but by two subspecialties that belong to two rather different main specialties. This means that we'll have a web of interest in which each person will serve as a bridge between different parts of the overall structure. You see, this is much better than having a tree that continues to branch out and out further and further, and nobody being able to talk to somebody on another branch. We'll have people that each belong to two branches that are in different parts, and then we'll be able to have some hope of coping with the knowledge as it comes. Maybe 50 more years go by, people will have three subspecialties. I don't know, but anyway, in any case, besides the specialties that people will have in such a future scenario, we'll also want to know something about other people's specialties, just as we do today. And as today we want to know about our place in the universe and our relationship to God, even if we aren't specialists in cosmology or theology. From this perspective, it is surely not forbidden for people like me to grapple with questions of religion, nor for theologians to grapple with questions of computation. And I can explain the results of my grapplings to people who are like me, probably better than a person with a different mode of thinking could do it. In fact, it's the same reason that other people than me would be much better to explain to my mother how to use Lotus 1, 2, 3. She would need someone who thinks like she does in order to explain the ideas of that work, even though I'm supposed to know more about computers. So, things a computer scientist rarely talks about. In my Stanford classes, of course, I never would speak about kinds of things that I plan to discuss in these lectures. At Stanford, I did have a tradition of setting aside the last day of every course for a special Q&A session, at which I promised to answer any questions that the students had on any subject, except questions about religion or politics. Religion is taboo at Stanford, although other kinds of knowledge are not, and I guess that makes sense. On the other hand, I remember reading a letter to the editor of the Caltech Alumni magazine many years ago. The writer said that during the first 10 years after he graduated, he wished he'd had more training in his major field. Then during the next 10 years, he wished he'd had more training in management. During the next 10, he wished he'd had more training in business planning. Then for another 10, he wished he'd learned more about medicine and health. And during the next 10, he wished he'd learned more about theology. So I've been concerned for a long time, in fact, about the lack of material about theology that is written for people like me. There's plenty of books for other kinds of people, it seems, but not very much for me. I can remember once going into a large so-called Christian bookstore and realizing that almost all of my professional colleagues would find it extremely oppressive just to be in that room. I'm disturbed by the notions of religion that many of my colleagues have, but I see that their notions were formed quite naturally in reaction to the things that they experience in the media that are aimed at different subcultures. But from my point of view, the way they look at religion is strange and totally distorted from the kind of religion that I grew up with. So when I was asked to give a series of lectures in this God and Computers program at MIT, my first reaction of no way can I contribute anything of quality was tempered by second thought that maybe I could say a few things that would be helpful to some of the people in this audience. Naturally, I never agree to give a talk unless I think I have something to say. In this case, I realized that there is one important message that I can bring to you that no theologian could ever do, precisely because of my amateur status. Namely, I can give testimonials that theologians have basically done a good job. After looking at hundreds of their books, I can report, as an essentially disinterested observer, that a lot of their work is both interesting and valuable. It was both interesting and valuable to me as I continue to seek to know more about God. I can explain to other people who share my own peculiar way of thinking what I've learned by reading works outside my own field of expertise. Please realize that these lectures don't represent a career change for me. This is a once-in-a-lifetime thing, after which I'm going to go back home and continue working on the stuff I do best. I want to use this opportunity to say things about which I feel deeply, even though other people could say them better, partly to inspire those other people to come forward and advance the discussion. But given that, I'm glad to attempt this just once, and what better place to do it than here at MIT. Now, of course, it's impossible to talk about religious issues without any bias, and so I have to explain to you where I'm coming from. I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I grew up as a member of the Lutheran Church, and I went to grade school and high school in Lutheran schools. My father devoted his lifetime to Christian education in the Lutheran school system. I attended church regularly, but Sunday morning was a separate compartment of my life. I had a kind of a cozy relationship with the church. I didn't feel a need to explore any alternatives. I had several excellent pastors, but I didn't know much about other people's faith. I was plenty busy with computer science and math more than 6 days per week. Important change came for me. It began in the fall of 1976 when I decided it would be interesting to learn more about the Bible by applying some of the techniques that I'd been using in learning about computer programs and learning about other complicated subjects. I decided that year, for reasons I'm going to explain to you next week, I decided to amuse myself by going to the library and finding out as much as I could about 60 randomly chosen verses of the Bible. This became the so-called 316 project because I decided to focus on the 16th verse of the 3rd chapter of each biblical book. It's a strange thing to do, perhaps, but next week I'm going to explain why it makes perfect sense. So meanwhile, please trust me. Just trust me. The main point is that in this way I could read what people of all different religious persuasions had said, and people from many different periods of history, and I could read what they had written about those verses. To my surprise, I learned so much from this exercise that I decided I really ought to share the experience with other people. Eventually it became clear to me that I should look even more thoroughly at the history of those verses, and then I should try to write a book about them. Perhaps I thought such a book would appeal to a few of my colleagues who are by nature turned off by almost all the other books that deal with religion. The title of the book that I should write was clear. It had to be called 316. I began to write 316 during the 1985-86 academic year when I happened to be living in Boston. In fact, it's the Boston connection. It was another big reason why I succumbed to the temptation to come here and give these lectures. It seems that this is the part of the world where I've had the best opportunity to study religious issues. That year, 85-86, was a very special year of my life. It was the 25th year of my marriage to Jill, and I had promised her that she could at last have a sabbatical year. During this year, I would do all the shopping and cooking and cleaning while she could write books. Well, some days after finishing the household chores, I did have a few extra hours to kill, so I went to the Bible Museum to copy down the 316 verses in dozens of different translations, and I also spent many, many days at the Boston Public Library looking at hundreds of Bible commentaries. I came several times on the Red Line to the Andover Harvard Library for books that weren't at Boston Public. And at the end of that year, it turned out that I wrote the chapters of the book about Ecclesiastes and the Song of Solomon while I was staying a few days in Cambridge at the home of my publishing partner, Peter Gordon, who lives a few blocks from Harvard Square. That was 1 week before Harvard's 350th anniversary, when they gave an honorary doctorate to Ronald Reagan. Some of you might remember that occasion. Anyway, that was 86. I like a phrase that was coined by Joseph Sittler, who was a guru for many Lutheran pastors in the Midwest a generation or so ago. Sittler said he was especially pleased to have been raised in the Lutheran tradition because it taught him that he didn't need a cerebral bypass operation in order to approach God. Martin Luther was a great scholar, a man who used his head and his heart simultaneously. The 316 project was a turning point in my life because it opened my eyes to what other scholars have written. I learned to appreciate the way God is present in the lives of people from many different cultures. I learned that there were deep connections between Christianity and other world religions. I no longer lived Sunday mornings in a different world from the world I occupied during the rest of the week. During that year in Boston, I attended an ACM conference on computer science education. Well, no, actually I didn't go to the conference. I went only to the reception. But anyway, when people at the reception asked me, what have you been doing lately, Don? I had to say sheepishly, I had been writing a book about the Bible. Wow, what a conversation stopper. Well, at least you would think so. I distinctly remember feeling that I was somehow coming out of the closet, and that everybody would think I'd really lost it. In those days, it was okay to be religious if you were Jewish, but not if you were Christian. To my surprise, however, several people were, in fact, encouraging, and they expressed an interest in reading drafts of the book before publication. Well, anyway, to make a long story not too long, I finished the book during weekends after returning to Stanford, and it was published in 1990. I'm not here today to sell copies of the book. A good book is going to find its audience without any hype, and a mediocre book is going to die a quiet death even if it has wonderful advertising. But I have to tell you something about the 316 book because the experience I had when writing it are what informed much of what I'm going to be talking about in the next lecture. Because that's when I had most time to think about these issues. Basically, that book discusses what many great theologians of all different persuasions and different ages have said about chapter 3, verse 16 of Genesis, about Exodus 3:16, and so on through Revelation 3:16. My conservative friends think the book is too liberal. My liberal friends think it's too conservative. Everybody agrees, however, that the artwork in the book is spectacular. I commissioned a different artist to do calligraphy of each of the 3:16 verses, and I'm going to be talking about that in the fourth lecture of this series. The book, it's not a preachy book where I say, here's what I believe, and I'm real smart, so you better believe it too. Rather, it's a book where I say, here are some important issues and some different perspectives. What do you think about them? In the remaining lectures of the series, I've thought of a few dozen things to say that possibly aren't entirely trivial. Lately, I've gotten a sense that people are developing a craving for better understanding of relations between scientific work and faith. Contributions of physicists, biologists, cosmologists, and theologians that I've read about have been extremely valuable, but I do feel that a computer science perspective can add many things that so far have been missing from these important discussions. A lot of computer scientists have no doubt come up with similar or better ideas than the ones I'm going to be bringing up in these lectures, and other people will no doubt be able to explain the ideas better than I can. Still, now that I have this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, I want to put the ideas on the table and give them my best shot. I certainly hope that these lectures are going to prove to be helpful to you as you ponder the mysteries of life in the future. Now, you might have noticed that I was reading these notes. It's interesting fact about C.P. Snow's two cultures. Have any of you ever been to a convention of English teachers? Did you not know that they actually read their papers to each other word for word? It blows the mind to think of that. Well, of course, computer scientists, we always just stand up there and talk. I know my pastor always reads his sermon, and so here today I didn't know whether I should read or just talk, but I thought I better be safe and try to read, since it has a little bit to do with faith. But the other thing is, I'm only half prepared. Namely, my plan was for these lectures that I would be 50% planned in advance and 50% improvised. So these lectures are not only about interaction between faith and science, but also interaction between me and you. And so now, starting at this point, or whenever I happen to get to it in the other lectures, I'd like to open it up for discussion, so that since my only preparation was living 60 years in order to get here today. I hope someone has a question. That way I can focus on what you really want to hear. Yes.
There are so many different versions. Why do you choose 16? And what does that have anything?
Yeah, the question is, there are so many different versions. Why did I choose 3:16? Is it because the square root of 10 is 3.16 or something like this? And the answer is come next week. That's the oh yeah.
What Bible did you use?
What?
What Bible?
What Bible did I use? Yeah, well, as I said, I went to the Bible Museum to look at every Bible I could get my hands on. So I wound up, in Boston Public Library. I found a lot of Bibles that I hadn't seen anywhere, and the Bible Museum has a room full of Bibles, and I found a lot of Bibles there. New Bibles were coming out during the time I was doing this project, and so I went back to the the Bible that preceded the King James Bible, the first English Bible. And I had about 60 different translations that I wrote out. Actually, it took much longer than I expected to write out these things in longhand. But for every verse, I wrote out 60 translations of it, and I got writer's cramp. The third lecture in this series is going to be about translating the Bible. And what I finally decided to do was to make my own translations And that, as I'm going to explain then, was one of the best decisions I ever made. Yeah. Standard size. I use the canonical books, not the Apocrypha. If I wanted to discuss to study the Apocrypha someday, though, I would start out probably by looking at chapter 3, verse 16, just because I'm into that. Yes, over here. Yes.
Your colleagues who you related to from the point of view of the scientific culture in your previous life, or just who knew you only as a computer scientist, and your relationship with them, how do they relate to you now that you've believe in a...
So how do my colleagues relate to me now that I published this book? Well,
you have this faith, you sense a feeling.
Well, let me explain that in a couple of different ways. First of all, at least to my face, they seem to like it. I don't know what they're saying to each. I don't know what they're saying to each other in emails and stuff. But no, actually, it's just the opposite. That I've gotten an amazing, amazingly positive mail. A lot of feedback from it. Now, I don't flaunt. I don't flaunt this particularly, it's wait for somebody to ask me. One time, for example, I don't like to wear suits, but I like to wear every once in a while something that's a little bit dressed up. I have a special shirt on today. Can you catch this? And my wife made a Christmas present for me that was based on an old Egyptian pattern, but it was then embroidered by a woman from Cambodia who had been sponsored by our church, and she was the best embroiderer in her village, and she made an absolutely gorgeous decoration on this thing that I can wear. And I wore it once to Brown University when I got one of those doctorates Ann was talking about. And people say, "Oh, here's the high priest of computer programming." Now. But the thing was, it was much more like a high priest's robe when I first got it, because she had put on the back a great big cross, and I couldn't feel right wearing that cross because I thought it was too much of a in your face thing. I'm not ashamed of it, but that's just the way I am. I figure if something about my life is Christian or whatever, that's fine. But I'm not going to try to get somebody else and say, well, you better do it too. But generally the reaction has been warm as far as I know, and in fact much warmer than I would have ever predicted. Yeah.
Are there any ways in which your study of theology has informed your work with computer science?
So, any ways in which my study of theology has informed my work with computer science? Well, only indirectly, I would say. It doesn't. I would find, since it gives me more of a sense of history, that I know that I understand more about the development of ideas in science, because science and religion have, in fact, not always been so separated as they are now. And so, for example, I could read things that Isaac Newton, it turned out, wrote about 30 pages about 1 Timothy 3:16. And I would have never looked at that before, see. And so this gave me a little bit of a more feeling for Isaac Newton. But it's a historical connection. I run into. I'm very interested as a scientist in how ideas get started in the first place, and so the more source materials I read, the better. So it has helped in that way. But otherwise, it's mostly for the other aspects of my life, the part that makes me want to feel like something as part of an ongoing system. question in the way back. Well, no, that's fine.
You've referred several times to a computer science perspective.
Yeah.
How do you distinguish that from other?
Okay, actually, I guess I have a kind of a radical idea about this, but I've had it for 30 years now, and I haven't, and still haven't been shaken in it. And that is that if someone says, why did computer science gel so fast and all of a sudden become a department at almost every university in the world, the reason was not because computers are so valuable as tools. So there's not a department of electron microscope science at every university and so on. But electron microscopes are great, are great and powerful things and so on. The reason that I'm convinced computer science grew so fast and is so vital today is because there were people all over the world who had this way of thinking that a computer scientist has. It's not a sharp focus, but it's different enough from other ways of thinking. I was talking about physicists and mathematicians. It's different enough from that they were all sitting in other departments. And suddenly, when it turned out that their way of thinking correlated well with being able to make a computer do tricks, then they found each other. And so it was this way of thinking. This was what I call a computer science perspective. Now, this is this way of thinking which brought them together into departments, and they met other people who had who would understand the same analogies and would structure knowledge in their heads about the same way. And that's what I meant by when I said computer science perspective. It's the thing that I didn't choose computer science because one of my missions in life was to advance computation. I chose computer science because I was good at it. It just happened that my peculiar way of thinking correlated well with computers. But I'm sure that people had this way of thinking hundreds of years ago, and I think I can recognize it in some of their writings. The ones who would have been computer scientists if there had been computer science. There had to be. There was a time when physicists were called natural philosophers, and there was a time before chemists had a department, and so just the fact that computer science happened to have gotten its name later, doesn't mean that 100 years from now it's not going to be the same as every other field. It's just a historical accident that it came about a little different time. But it's a way of thinking that is characterized by. I distinguish it. One of the main characteristics is the jumping between levels of abstraction very quickly, between low level and high level, without almost unconsciously. And another thing is the computer scientist tends to be able to deal with non-uniform structures. Case 1, case 2, case 3, and while a mathematician will tend to want one unifying axiom that governs the whole thing, and this is a weakness of computer science when we get to a theory that can be done by one axiom, but we'll still give it 5 because there's no sweat for us to but we're at our best in things when no simple theory does explain it, and then we can handle the dichotomy, the discrepancies between the different things. So that's what I tend to think is different about computer scientists, and I find about 1 person in 50 has this way of looking at stuff. Yes, right at the wall.
Do you have any comments on the religion, other Eastern religions?
Yeah, in expanding knowledge, no, that's what you get from the government grant. You don't get that from the Stanford Endowment. Stanford Endowment goes for teaching. So it's a similar thing like that. That I'm thinking, what are the hours in a classroom for teaching supposed to do? A seminar like this is off the chart. So, yes, in purple.
Are you going to get to play the organ while you're here? I'm worried about it'll be away from.
Am I going to get to play the organ while I'm here? This was. I had a great opportunity the previous year in Boston, and so I know there's lots of wonderful organs, and I've been offered a chance to play on a fine hook organ in Andover, and maybe some others. But I have to get these lectures in shape first. Yes.
What do you think about the rate of the growth of computer science, and also what types of expectations do you have for the future of computer science?
What do I think about the rate of growth of computer science? I really wish that it would slow down so that I could finish my book. So, I keep hoping that some things will keep people busy enough that some bad ideas will come along and suck in a lot of people to like Java. I'm just teasing. But it doesn't happen. Computer science keeps getting bigger and broader and deeper, and I can't predict that it's going to go on at this rate. Amdahl's law certainly. Moore's law certainly can't go on, but computer science. Will computer science still be growing 50 years from now? It's hard for me to say that with confidence. I would say biology, I could say with confidence, will be growing 200 years from now. Biology, much more rich subject than computer science, just by its nature, has so much more to deal with. But computer science, still, we have no indication of any slowdown whatsoever. Yes.
You mentioned some of the theologians you found compatible with your culture.
Could I mention some of the theologians I found compatible with my culture? Well, okay, so I tend to be a detail-oriented person, as you can guess, and so and so are a lot of theologians, really. In fact, as I was writing this book, it wasn't that different from writing my computer books, except I wasn't using integral signs as much and things, But the processes of abstraction and generalization are much the same, and interpreting text, really I would say there wasn't that much difference in mentality between them, except expertise in languages, which has a lot of nuances which I don't understand. I can only believe what I read. But the people that would be actually, I'm going to talk. The fifth lecture is about what I learned about God during this project and what I learned about theologians during this project. And so I prefer to talk a little more about that at that time. Yes?
Say something about your thoughts on the value of prayer.
My thoughts on the value of prayer. I should probably be praying now. Somebody will ask me an easier question. Actually, I don't know why, but I believe there is a value to prayer, and one of the things I want to do before this series of lectures is over is put up on the web a wonderful parable which explains why I think that. The parable itself has nothing to do with prayer. It's called Planet Without Laughter. It's a book. It's a little short story by Raymond Smullyan, and it's in a book that's out of print. I've got permission from him to put it on the web, but I'm still waiting for permission from the publisher. Because when you see that, I think you'll get the idea where somehow I know sometimes that prayer works, but I don't know why. But I can only say that, and nobody can prove it, and I don't think God wants it to be provable. So yes.
What sorts of analysis that you run across in computer science prove to be most useful in doing this research? And as a side question, were these sorts of thoughts more common in the writers that you read from various religious texts than you'd expect from writers at large?
Yeah, actually, no, there wasn't that much quantitative stuff in the religious texts, but obviously, in fact, there was. It turned out that Numbers 3:16, of all things, was about numbers, and And so so there was some interesting mathematics in there. But the most quantitative things I could say, I'll talk a little bit about this next week. The most quantitative thing I could get was the study of randomness, and so that's next week I talk about that at length. But there are qualitative things. There are qualitative things that are informed by analysis. So, for example, knowing the idea that I could prove a program correct helps me to write a program, even though I'm not going to prove it correct. I don't have the time to go and check that the program for tech is actually 100% correct. I don't know how to formulate the concept that a Metafont program draws a beautiful letter A or not. So I can't prove that program is correct. But still, somehow, the theory that I've learned while doing computer science gives me more confidence in these programs that I have. It's a kind of a similar thing. I don't have a direct connection between numbers and this work on the Bible. I have it's just a methodology that's sort of informed by working with numbers that also can work with less quantitative stuff. There's lots and lots of hands. What are we going to do here? Let me go way back there.
Do you have any comments or conclusions regarding the existence and nature of evil?
Comments and conclusions about the existence and knowledge of evil. That's probably one of the great. The question is, for example, why are people killed in wars and stuff? I'll be getting to this later on, but I don't have any new insights that I haven't picked up from other people. And the book of the book of Job discusses this and comes to and tries to come to a conclusion. And if you look at 10 commentaries on the book of Job, each one says that the conclusion was different, which means that it's a tough problem, I think. But still, there must be something there. What would the world be like if there was no evil? I will be trying to get at this more in the 5th and 6th lectures. Yes, in the middle. My idea that the human brain is a giant computer program. That is hard to prove or disprove, I guess. I'm not sure how. Okay, I tend to believe that the new models of the brain that are based on the idea of continuous dynamic evolution as we talk, and to explain consciousness are right on. But that would mean that there's a lot of randomness involved in that, and so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that also in the later lectures. I'm using that as an excuse too often, I guess. But maybe the brain uses random elements, or maybe these things come in some way that are controlled by prayers or whatever. Who knows? It might be. We might only be seeing one dimension of. 3 dimensions of some other reality. I'm going to try to explore these questions from my limited viewpoint later on, but I don't have the definitive answer. Yes.
You mentioned earlier, when asked about the relationship of computer science problems to the theological reading, there wasn't much quantitative stuff in theology. But some of your computer science work on literate programming deals with things that are very hard to quantify, things like readability and ease of understanding. And I'm wondering if you found parallels between that work and the work that you've done reading the theologians.
Okay, so he's saying that some of my work is not on theorem proving and so on, but more on methodology, where I think something, where I write a computer program and I feel happy about it, not because I proved that it was correct, but because I felt it was elegant or something like this. So there's this aspect of aesthetics, I believe that all the non-quantitative things probably carry over very much to the in the world of theology. Again, you're stealing away from my fifth lecture. I'm not going to have anything left to say if you don't. Red shirt.
Various changes in human life over the years have had an impact on religion, and I wondered if you had an opinion on what the impact of the existence of computers, the existence of computer science, maybe even simply the bringing together of this community of people who think alike, will have on future theology.
Okay, what influence will computer science maybe have on theology? There's the simple answer is there's a lot of resources that are much easy, make it much easier now to approach this vast literature, and you can click on a word and find out what the Greek was, and you can find out where that Greek word was used elsewhere, and so on. So many aids to self-exploration are going to come out of just of having the technology and having a home page for the Book of Mark, and so on, where for every part of the Bible there will be, and other religions there will be surveys of things that people can refine and make more accessible than things were before to the people who want to explore in their own patterns. Now. Will it change to other ways of revelation of God? This is a really interesting question. I haven't thought about much. There's this general notion of process theology which says that over the centuries, God has been revealing Himself, herself in different ways. And when I first heard about that, it sounded to me like nonsense, because I had always been taught that God was the same today, not yesterday and today and forever. But then, the more I thought about it, it was the only sensible thing to do. That God would not explain things 2,000 years ago in terms of molecules. Even though molecules are there, people didn't know what molecules were. So Jesus wouldn't talk about molecules, and so on. That in fact it only makes sense that different kinds of revelation are appropriate as the people in the world change. So it's a very good question. I'm worried that somebody will start a new religion based on fractals. I mean, in other words, religion has a certain power that charlatans can take advantage of, and so if you come up with something that makes a little bit of sense and has a little bit of mystery to it, you can get a lot of people fooled by it, and so I also have that in mind, that as a possible danger. Yeah, way back.
If you were to give a lecture for an audience of theologians on the subject of computer science, what would you talk about? What could they learn?
If I were to give a lecture to an audience of theologians, now, have you ever given a lecture? Yeah, let me tell you that the amount of terror that lives in a speaker's stomach when giving a lecture is proportional to the amount he doesn't know about his audience. And it was hard enough for me once at Caltech. I gave lectures to biologists about computer science, and that was one of the hardest I ever had to do. No, I would think though that I could explain to the people whose readings I've read I could explain to them some interesting ideas about infinity that they might be able to get some ideas from, and maybe I'll be able to go into some of that in the 6th lecture. 2 more questions is the limit here. Anna, will you choose who's going to?
Talk about the computer science perspective, and it seems to me there's a danger of that perspective in that computer scientists like to abstract things and say, okay, I got a handle on this, and with religious matters that may not be possible. You can't think of prayer as a black box that, here's what I call in prayer, here's what I get out. And so I wonder if you see that danger that people think they've got a handle on stuff that they really don't.
Yeah. So it says, I was talking about the computer science perspective. Isn't there a danger that this could be the wrong perspective to apply to theology? And absolutely. In fact, although this article by Newton about Timothy, 1 Timothy 3:16 turned out to be really, I admired it a lot. He studied a lot of manuscripts of Greek papyri and so on, and as to where somebody had made a copying error in this passage, and he nailed. He nailed the manuscript where it was, and this was an original contribution that Newton made to theology. But he wrote other writings about the Book of Daniel and Revelation, where he took these very very mystical, symbolic books, and he treated them as mathematical formula and axioms, and he tried to say, well, if assuming this, then this must be true, and so on. And I felt so sorry for him. And similarly, I'm sure that I can make mistakes like that too. But still, I have a right to my mistakes. Anna, one more.
In your lecture, you described defining the book as the turning point of your life. It implies there's some part of you that was going in one direction, now going in another. Can you say more about that? What's changed?
Okay, so why did I say it was a turning point in my life? It wasn't a 180-degree turn, but it opened my eyes more to things that I hadn't had a motivation to look at before. The way other people practice their religion, the history of different strains of Christianity, and I felt also it was a turning point in the sense that, well, it gave me overconfidence. In other words, before I hadn't read much, and so I could only feel that maybe I was missing something. Now I've read enough that I feel that I know everything, which I don't. I mean, it changed. It gave me more confidence, and maybe that's a better or worse thing. But it did, at least. When I did this project, there were no holds barred on what I was going to look at. I was going to explore whatever had been said by everybody, and let them shoot their ammunition whichever way it would go. And after I had done that, and still come through with what I felt was a strong enough faith to get through the rest of my life. This gave me this confidence, which I couldn't have had before I did the experiment. Okay. Well, thank you very much.